All right, we are back for history and we are going to learn about Neil Armstrong today. We talked about John Glenn yesterday and we talked about his life as a little boy, being interested in planes and wanting to be a pilot. Both John Glenn and Neil Armstrong had fathers who had brought them up in airplanes, and that just fueled their love for wanting to fly between when they were 5 and 8 years old. And John Glenn was able to find a program when he was in college that would give him flying lessons for free. So he took full advantage of that program. But he just had so many great dreams and aspirations. He ended up joining, he was in, first of all, the Korean War, and he was a Navy pilot during that time and served his country. But then afterwards, he ended up becoming an astronaut with NASA. Sadly, he wasn't the first or even the second man in space, but he was part of the third Mercury mission that was going up into space. But the one thing that he did do was that he was the first American to orbit the Earth. Okay, and what did we say? He did it how many times? What? 3 times in about 5 hours he was able to orbit the Earth. But then there was a fear. The people that were on the ground were afraid that what wasn't going to work. The heat shield wasn't going to work and protect him from that capsule catching on fire. But when he went back into the Earth's atmosphere, but as he came into the Earth's atmosphere, yes, the capsule did catch on fire, but the heat shield did protect him, and he was able to land safely in the ocean, and then he was brought to land later, so he did okay. He was just a hero after that, and nobody had done anything like that. And even President Kennedy decided to visit him, and he wanted to go back up into space and see different things and experience. But John F. Kennedy said, no, I want to keep my heroes safe. This is an important man in the history of our United States, and I want to keep you safe. So he didn't let him go back up, but John Glenn was like, I'm not just going to sit around and do nothing and just kind of go, oh yes, do you want me for a parade? Do you want me for, no. He decided to become a senator for the United States. So he became an Ohio senator, and he served as that senator for 25 years. And then he was able to go back in space at 77 years old. See, some of you get me. Some of you are like, at what? But some of you knew, because we have that like telepathy thing going. At 77 years old, he was the oldest man that went to go into space at that time. So this was just an amazing thing for him to be able to do. This was very different from his first flight, because on this flight, he orbited the 134 times instead of only those 3 times. He went with 6 other people as well and traveled 3 million miles as he orbited the Earth. So just a really neat thing to think about. All right, so page 427, the comprehension check. I want to go over that with you before we go on to Neil Armstrong. Number 1, John Glenn took swimming lessons before he graduated from college. That is false. I already gave you part of the answer when I was, it's flying lessons, not swimming lessons. Number 2, when John Glenn heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he decided to enlist in the military. Yes, that is true. 3, John Glenn became a pilot and flew in both World War II and the Korean War. That is also true. Good. John Glenn set the speed record for the fastest flight across the continental United States. Yes, that is also true. Remember, his was, I think, 720 miles per hour or something. And we were thrilled with Amelia Earhart's 180, but this was such a different thing. Number 5, 3 men were chosen to be the first astronauts. That is false. How many? Yes, good. 7. 7 men were chosen to be the first astronauts. 6, John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth. We just talked about that. Yes, he was. 7, after serving in the Navy, John Glenn became a governor. No, not governor. False. That's why you read the whole thing carefully. What did he become? A senator, not a governor. So make sure to read all the way through. Good. And then when John Glenn was 77, he had a second chance to go into space. And we know that is also true. Very good. All right, so now page 428, Neil Armstrong. Love of planes. Well, we kind of figured that much, right? Ever since his first airplane ride as a small boy, Neil Armstrong was fascinated with planes and flying. Neil began building model airplanes. When World War II started, he was not old enough to serve in the military, but he studied and knew everything about each plane that flew during the war. So he couldn't be in the war, but he's going, oh, I know this plane, and this plane does this, and this is what this plane does, and this is what this plane, like we said yesterday, if you have an interest in something, you may not be able to do it right now, but learn as much as you can, because that may be something that will help you in your future. God put it on your heart for a reason, so you never know what he's going to use it for. So just be aware of that. Learning to fly. I'm going to fly a plane someday, Neil thought. But lessons were expensive, and he needed to get a job to pay for them. Like John Glenn, he looked for jobs to earn extra money. He worked at a donut factory and mowed lawns. By the time Neil was only 15 years old, he had earned enough money to take lessons and get his pilot's license. After high school, Neil went to college on a Navy scholarship. But even before graduation, his country needed him. He trained to fly single-engine fighter planes and received his naval aviator license. Try to say that 5 times fast. Naval aviator, no, yeah, see, it's hard. Naval aviator license when he was only 20 years old. So 20 years old, he didn't even finish college yet, but the country needed him. They needed him to do this fighter pilot training and all of that. Korean War. Does that war sound familiar? Like I said, my uncle served in that war, so he served with John Glenn and Neil Armstrong. I don't think he knew of them, but it's kind of an interesting connection. Like John Glenn, Neil Armstrong was a fighter pilot in the Korean War. His mission was to slow down the North Korean army by destroying their bridges and railroads. On one of Neil Armstrong's missions, the enemy shot his plane. So he's going in as a fighter pilot to, take down bridges and take down railroads so that they can't continue to advance. But as he's swooping in one of those times, his plane gets shot down. He was able to fly out of North Korea, but he could not make it back to the aircraft carrier where he would be landing his plane on this big aircraft carrier to be safe. He couldn't make it to the aircraft carrier or another base. He had to escape by parachuting to the ground. Later, he was rescued by American troops. Thankfully, the North Koreans didn't see him and try to capture him or anything, but he was rescued by American troops. When the war ended, Neil Armstrong finished his college education. So even though he's this great, war hero and has done all these different things and served his country, he didn't just say, well, that's good enough. No, I got to finish college. I didn't finish, and I want to be able to do that. So he finishes college. After his marriage to Janet Sheeran in 1956, the couple moved to California, where Mr. Armstrong became a test pilot. Well, let's find out about test pilots. When Neil Armstrong was at Edwards Air Force Base in California, he flew the X-15 hypersonic jet. Sounds pretty serious, right? This plane could fly over 4,000 miles per hour. We were like, whoa, with the 720 miles an hour, I believe it was. But 4,000 miles per hour? What? He tested more than 200 models of planes, jets, and rockets. While in California, Mr. Armstrong joined the NASA Astronaut Corps. So now look at the bottom, space race. Imagine the first airplane was barely able to keep the Wright brothers in the air. Remember, they were excited to just be at 59 seconds, yes, we finally did it. But now the year is 1957 and the space program has begun. They were, 59 seconds getting a plane in the air, but now we're going to try to shoot a rocket, not like, one of those play toy ones and see it go into the air and come back down. No, into the air and actually try to go places in that spacecraft. The world had its sights on outer space. The world, not just Americans. Many powerful countries began to see who could get the first satellite and the first man into space. It was kind of, that's why they call it a space race. Who's going to be the first one? Which country is going to be the first one to get a man into space and change the course of history? The Russians took the lead, launching the first satellite, but America was not far behind. Alan Shepard, and you can see his picture there, became the first American in space. His flight lasted about 15 minutes. This was a great accomplishment at the time. On May 25th, 1961, President John F. Kennedy said, "This nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before the decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth." So John F. Kennedy said, our goal, our desire should be to put a man on the moon and then get him safely back to earth. This would not be an easy task, but Americans were ready for the challenge. Let's find out what happens. In space and on the moon. Neil Armstrong moved his family to Houston, Texas, and began his astronaut training at NASA. He was thankful to be chosen to join this special group of pilots who would explore space. In 1966, Neil Armstrong piloted the Gemini 8, that's 8 because it's 3 after, the Gemini 8. This was an important mission because it was the first time 2 spacecraft were able to dock together successfully. Men were getting closer to their goal of landing on the moon. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched. The world watched as Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins lifted off the launch pad and soared into outer space with the goal of landing on the moon. Would the men be successful? Would they ever return? I mean, are they going to get there and then get lost in space and not know how to get back? The spacecraft was on its way. As Apollo 11 neared the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed into another part of the ship called the Eagle. Then they separated from the main ship and headed to the surface of the moon. The date was July 20th, 1969. Imagine how the 2 astronauts felt as the Eagle landed. The world watched while Neil Armstrong opened the door, stepped down, and placed his foot on the moon. As his foot touched the surface, he said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Interesting bonus fact, that one small step that Neil Armstrong took was actually a 4-foot jump. Okay, you think of 4 feet. That's tall. 4-foot jump of because of the way that the spacecraft landed on the moon in order for him to get down onto the surface of the moon. So it wasn't just this little step; it was a 4-foot leap. And then you can see the pictures there. Buzz Aldrin on the moon with research equipment and the Eagle. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin spent about 2.5 hours on the moon. They placed an American flag, and you can see that back in the background of the picture there, and a plaque on its surface. The plaque said, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." They gathered rocks and soil from the moon's surface and left some equipment that measures the distance from the moon to the Earth. The Eagle lifted off the moon and attached to the main ship successfully. It's got attached back, and it did. Now it was time to head back to Earth. The country was so excited for the success of these new pioneers. They were America's newest heroes. Everyone wanted to see them and hear what they had to say. The 3 astronauts flew in the president's plane, Air Force One, to New York City, where a parade was given in their honor. They went on the Giant Leap Tour, which took them to 21 other countries telling of their trip to the moon. So they didn't just talk about it in America, they went to other countries as well. Another bonus fact, Neil Armstrong carried a piece of the wing fabric from the Wright brothers' plane in his spacesuit while he walked on the moon. So even the Wright brothers were kind of there on the moon as a tribute to them, which is kind of a neat thing. Neil Armstrong continued to work for NASA a few more years. He received many awards, including the Medal of Freedom. He was involved in the space program until his death in 2012. Space program. After Apollo 11 landed on the moon, 5 more moon flights followed. In all, 12 United States astronauts walked on the surface of the moon. In 1981, the space shuttle launched for the first time. Sally Ride later became the first American woman in space when she flew on the shuttle in 1983. In all, over 100 shuttle missions have launched into space. The International Space Station began orbiting the Earth in 1998. This space laboratory is about as long as a football field and can often be seen from Earth on a clear night. So when it's a clear night, there are many times where you might be looking up and thinking it's a star or something else, but it's actually the International Space Station. A crew of 6 people from around the world live and work on that space station, performing experiments and tests, taking photographs, and sending information back to Earth. How cool is that? How amazing is that? The Bible says, Psalm 8:3-4, when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? God's got this amazing creation, but yet he knows us and he wants to know us as individuals, as people. Yes, he made all of these wonderful, grand things for us in this wonderful, amazing universe, but he wants us and he wants to know us better. And when we think about all the things that he's made and all the things that he's done, how special is it that he loves us that much? So comprehension check on page 433. You're going to work on that. We'll review over that tomorrow. The answers tomorrow, if I remember. And we're going to learn about Ronald Reagan tomorrow. And I'm so excited. So we're going to have a test the end of next week over chapters 43, 44, and 45. So we just finished 43, which is John Glenn and Neil Armstrong, so be studying through that. Then we're going to learn about Ronald Reagan, and then we're going to learn about Daniel Chappie James. We'll find out who that is as we go along. So be prepared for that and keep doing well. You guys are making me so proud. I'll see you in the next video. I love you. See you. Bye.